Hi everyone, welcome. I'm out here in my garden, and if you're a regular on my channel, you might know what I've got here in front of me, but for those of you that might be new, what I've got here is my outdoor composting barrel, and in this bag over here, I've got a batch of worms, and I've done this for 2 years now. It was last winter when I first tried it, when I set up this barrel that's underneath as my so-called overwintering experiment to see how the worms do. And I figured I'd give it a go another time this year, but this time I'm doing it inside of this fabric grow bag. And even though I only treat this as kind of my outdoor worm bin, this compost barrel here probably has as many, if not more, worms in it than the outdoor worm barrel or worm bag. So I never know what to call them. I guess this is my outdoor worm bag or outdoor worm system or overwinter worm system. And this is really just my composting barrel. So I'm always kind of tossing different expressions around, never know exactly what to refer to each as. But the cool thing that happened here a week ago was that they each got a big treat. I took a huge number of tomatoes that I had left over from when I took my garden apart many months ago when the first freeze set in, and they were just getting moldy and nasty, and it was time to get rid of them. So part of the leftover collection of tomatoes went in here, and the other part of it went in there. And after a week's time, I've just been really curious to see how things have progressed in these containers. So we're going to take a peek inside these, and I guess we'll start over here. We're just going to move some stuff aside. The other thing I've got going on right here is a little thing of crushed eggshell. One thing that my outdoor systems sort of don't get often enough, I think, is grit. So I figured today might be a good idea to just bring my supply of crushed eggshell out here and give these systems a little bit of grit. Now, what's happening here is, I don't even know if these are still alive or not, but I had been experiencing some issues with mites downstairs in my wormery, and I had attempted to snatch up a number of items that I found in my bin that seemed to be drawing a lot of mites. And then I just brought it out here and I dumped it into my outdoor composting barrel. And I don't know if, I'm not sure if these mites have succumbed to the cold and maybe they've all died. I mean, this thing doesn't look much different than it did when I bought it out here. So I'm not sure if these mites are living or not. They're kind of slow movers, so the only way to really tell if they're alive is to sometimes play back the video much more quickly, and then it's easier to see whether they're moving or not. But I'm not sure what the deal is with these mites, if they're alive or dead. Since I figured this is more or less an anything goes sort of an environment, they can come out here and they can have at it out here if they can handle the cold. I just didn't want them in my indoor worm bin, and I've still got plenty of them hanging out in my indoor worm bin. So hopefully I can reduce their numbers in there. Now, this tomato came out here after I had dumped in all of the garden tomatoes. This was a store-bought tomato that just started going bad inside. So this was not really part of the tomato feast that they got a week ago. These freshly added grape stems and pepper pieces and tomato, these are all newly added things that have come in here over the past week. What we're seeing down lower is part of the tomato feast, and I thought that maybe after a week's time the worms would be able to sort of zero in on what I had added here and possibly start swarming it if they're in fact interested in what I've added for them. And I can already see a couple worms over here that have made their way over into the tomato feast. And here's one on top of this tomato. I could see a couple hanging out on top of this tomato. I made the same observation last week too when I looked at these worms that hang out here. I always have to assume that my outdoor worm bins are populated with red wiggler worms, because red wigglers are what I've had in my wormery for the longest period of time. So it's always the red wiggler worm castings that end up out in the garden to nourish my garden plants. And I always assume that it's red wiggler cocoons that have made their way out here, and that it's probably red wiggler worms that are what roam around in the soil out in my garden here. So I don't know for sure, but every time I see worms infiltrating my outdoor systems, specifically this composting barrel, I just assume that they're red wiggler worms. These Cherokee purple, I think this was a Cherokee purple tomato. These were so delicious. Now down here, right underneath the tomatoes, where all the juices are starting to flow down, here we're seeing a nice little jumble of worms coming along to sip up all the delicious juices. I'm sure they're not pleased with the fact that I'm in here bothering them, but I was just so curious. I felt like I had to see what the heck was going to happen in here after a week's time of allowing these tomatoes to continue breaking down. It's always fun seeing worms hanging out in this container. Like I said, I've never added worms to this container. I don't know if I've said it in this video, but I've said it before in all the other videos. I've never populated this container with any worms. These worms have all just voluntarily made their way into this container, out of the soil, up into this system, and I'm sure it's multiple generations at this point that have just lived in here over the past couple years now. I don't even remember. I don't think I emptied this container out recently. It's just kind of keeps going, and there's not a lot of material in here. The level's not that high, as you can tell, because the material just keeps getting broken down. And another heavy contributor to that breakdown process is what you see right here. That's the larvae of a black soldier fly, and right now in this cold we shouldn't really expect to see much activity out of those black soldier fly larvae, because I believe that right now in this cold weather they're kind of in a dormant state. But from what I've read, they do that to protect themselves over the cold months, and then they just sort of continue where they left off when the weather warms back up. So hopefully these black soldier fly larvae are just in a dormant state, and then they'll return to their composting activities once the warm weather returns. So we'll see. So there's a whole bunch of worms hanging out all over the place, but I'm starting to feel like I'm going to return all these guys to the hole. We'll just drop in all these tomatoes again and let the process continue. Sorry guys, sorry to disturb your feast. But I am glad to see that the tomatoes were well received and that they're enjoying them. Some people did say, you know, hey, a lot of acid in there. I guess anybody that eats pizza or tomato sauce or Italian dishes and then gets heartburn afterwards might be concerned that, hey, these little guys are in a bath of acid. But I think just from the fact that you could see them cruising around all over these tomatoes is evidence that they're not really put off by it. But nevertheless, I'm going to add some grit, and the grit that I use is also got a nice side effect of neutralizing exceedingly acidic material. It's crushed eggshell. So we're just going to give them a little bit of crushed eggshell here. I'm taking care not to breathe this stuff in as the air blows this eggshell dust around. I'm turning my head away. trying not to breathe that stuff in because it's harmful to your lungs. You don't want to breathe that stuff in if it's airborne while you're working with it, so you got to be careful if you use it. All right, let's get everything back in here covered up again the way it was. A couple different layers here. We can get our cells situated over in the outdoor composting bin, or the outdoor worm bin. Ugh. It was freezing overnight. In fact, it's still freezing temperature as right now. Temperatures will go up above freezing later today, but right now they're still hovering right around freezing. So as you saw, the top surface was somewhat frozen. But my hope is that things in here, as we work our way in to the container, are a little bit more hospitable for the worms. It's the one thing I always worry about with these little guys, is that it just gets a little bit too chilly for them. But somehow they seem to do okay, regardless of my concerns. Here we did not place as many tomatoes into the container as we did the other one. And the ones that we placed in this one were a little bit further along in the decomposition process, so they were rather moldy and kind of gross. So I kind of assumed we would find more worms in here, or at least on these tomatoes, than we did in the other container, mainly because the material was in a more advanced state of breakdown with all the mold on it and everything. And I gotta tell you, as I'm, working my way through this material, it is quite chilly. My hands are cold from handling this. But I'm really glad to see that these worms are seemingly unaffected by the cold. I always had this sort of sense that if the temperatures drop really low, then the worm composting activity is just gonna sort of screech to a halt. But clearly the worms are doing quite nicely down in here. So I'm a little bit limited on space. I'm not sure how much further we're going to be able to go. I'm just trying to use this outer edge over here that I created to stack up whatever I'm able to pull out of here as we inspect it. But it's sort of like what I expected. It's turned into a nice worm party, a tomato feast, because of all the moisture, I believe. Tomatoes bring with them a great deal of moisture that the worms are always seriously drawn to. They're always really going to like a nice damp meal. So I got a feeling that they're going to do away with these tomatoes quite quickly. I mean, right now you can still make these out as tomatoes, but I don't think they're going to be recognizable for a great deal longer. So let's do the same here as we did before. Let's drop a little bit of grit on top of all this yummy tomato for these little guys, and then we can start returning everything back down into the container. All right, that was fun. I had a hunch that that was kind of what we were gonna find when we come back in here. And even though it's early January and we're in the dead of winter here in central New Jersey, the temperatures during the day do rise up into the 40s in most cases. And I believe that's what's going to be the situation for the next 10 or so days according to the extended forecast. So I'm not overly concerned about the temperatures overnight when they drop down into the 20s. I think the worms can handle it. They kind of stay in the middle and distance themselves from the colder temperatures around the outer edges and on the top surface. So these bins are doing quite nicely with their tomato feast. So I'm going to go ahead and return my supply of eggshell grit to the wormery. I'm going to wash off my glove and put everything away, but I'm not going to take up your time with that. That's boring. Really quick before I go though, let me just say thank you. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Give me a thumbs up if you did. I hope you did. If you haven't done so already, also consider subscribing to the channel too. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.